Have you ever kept a family secret for decades? I won't ask what, just curious.
At Thanksgiving, my uncle stood up from the table with his glass raised, and everyone fell quiet because we all knew what was coming, the traditional speech that he gave every year where he went around acknowledging each cousin for something they had accomplished. And although it always felt a little rehearsed, people looked forward to it because it was this strange family ritual where recognition was handed out like prizes, and even when it was forced, everyone wanted to be included. I sat there waiting, my smile already in place, because I thought of course my name would come up at some point, and it didn't even matter what he said, just hearing it would mean that someone noticed me, that I hadn't completely disappeared into the background of this family that I had grown up in. One by one, my cousins were called out. He praised Emily for graduating with honors, and the table clapped so loudly that she had to wave her hands to quiet everyone down, and then he moved to Brian, who had just gotten engaged, and the whole family erupted in cheers. He even mentioned little things, how Sarah was doing a great job balancing her work and being a new mom, how Daniel had finally settled into his new job after struggling for years, how even the younger ones were showing promise at school. With each name, the room filled with warmth and approval, and I clapped along, nodded, and pretended not to notice that my turn wasn't coming. It wasn't as if I needed a medal or a standing ovation, but as the list grew and my name still hadn't been said, I started to feel my chest tighten, because I knew how this worked. And it became clearer with every passing second that he was going to move through the entire family and somehow leave me out, as if my presence at that table was less important, as if nothing I had done mattered enough to even earn a polite sentence. And then he wrapped it up with a toast, saying how proud he was of the family, how everyone had accomplished so much, and people raised their glasses and cheered, and my name had never been spoken once. I felt the heat rising in my face, but I forced the smile to stay because I didn't want anyone to see the crack. I raised my glass too, pretending to sip even though my throat felt dry, and I told myself maybe it was just a mistake, maybe he had forgotten, maybe he thought he had already mentioned me, and it was just some oversight, but the truth sank in fast and heavy. No, this wasn't an accident, it was a pattern, and it had been happening for years in different forms, little ways that showed me where I stood in the hierarchy of this family, and every time I ignored it, but this time it cut deeper because it was so public right in front of everyone. When the clinking of glasses ended and people started laughing and talking again, I sat back and let the voices wash over me, but I wasn't really listening. I looked at my plate, moved the food around, and felt myself detached from the entire moment, like I was just watching them from a distance. And then I made the decision. I pulled my phone out quietly, held it up, and snapped a photo of the table with everyone mid-laughter, mid-bite, mid-celebration, their faces full of joy. Nobody noticed me do it. Nobody cared that I had gone silent. I slipped the phone back down and forced one last smile. I excused myself early, saying I had something to take care of, and not a single person questioned me, not even my parents, who were too busy talking with the others to realize I had barely spoken all night. As I drove away, I kept replaying the moment in my head, that speech that had excluded me so effortlessly, and instead of letting it eat me alive like it usually did, I felt something sharper forming inside me. Because what hurt the most wasn't just that I was left out, it was that I had let them do it for so long, and maybe the only way to make them notice was to stop being quiet about it. When I got home, I stared at that photo on my phone for a long time. It was just a table full of smiling faces, but to me it looked like evidence. And in that moment, I realized I didn't need to scream or confront them in person, because sometimes the quietest actions carry the heaviest weight. I opened my social media, uploaded the picture, and typed a single caption that wasn't angry, wasn't loud, but was sharp enough to make someone stop and think. And as I pressed post, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: control. That was the moment I realized I could stay invisible forever, or I could finally make them see me. And they were about to. When I got home and stared at that photo for longer than any normal person should stare at a holiday picture, I realized that I did not want to fight in the middle of the dining room or a dramatic exit that would get rewritten by everyone else's memory by next week. I wanted the kind of statement that sat quietly in a corner yet pulled every eye in the room toward it, so I posted the shot and wrote a caption that was calm and almost polite on its face, a caption that said it all without clawing at anyone's throat, something like how family is supposed to be where you are seen even when you are not shining, and how strange it is to sit at a table and feel like a chair. And the second I hit publish, I felt that click in my chest that told me I had finally stopped volunteering to be the forgettable one. At first, I watched the notifications the way people watch a kettle that never boils, but then the likes began to appear in a slow, steady line. Friends from work who had no stake in my family's fragile pecking order left comments that were simple and kind. A former roommate sent a message that made me laugh in that bitter way where you inhale instead of exhale, and a couple of old classmates wrote that they understood exactly what I meant because holidays have a way of measuring you against the loudest person at the table and pretending that is fairness. And as I scrolled through that stream of small affirmations, I felt my shoulders drop, because for once my version of the night was not being contested right away by the chorus that usually rushes in to correct me. It did not take long for the family to notice, because even the relatives who swear they never check social media somehow manage to keep a running tally of what everyone else posts. And I could tell when the cousins started to see it, because the view count jumped and then the little typing bubbles began to pop up in my messages like warning lights, with notes that were all some version of "Are you okay?" and "Why would you say that?" and "You know he did not mean anything and you are being a bit dramatic." And instead of defending myself, I decided to do something cleaner, so I edited the post to pin a first comment that listed the names my uncle had thanked in the exact order he said them, not to shame anyone, but to hold the mirror steady. And then I put a blank line where my name should have been and added a small sentence that read, "I waited for my turn and it never came." And then I closed the app and made tea because I did not want to sit there and feed on the replies like I used to do. The phone started ringing before the water even boiled, and when I saw my aunt's name I knew that the message had crossed from phones into the actual house, where everyone was probably cutting pie and arguing over the best way to pack leftovers. And when I answered, she did not say hello. She launched straight into a sobbing apology mixed with a panic that sounded like it had less to do with my feelings and more to do with the optics, telling me that my uncle was crushed, that I had humiliated him, that family matters stay in the family, and that I had no idea how much trouble I was about to cause because people talk and people judge, and people love to see a family crack on a holiday. And while she cried and pleaded, I stood there and listened and realized I had spent years giving these calls my full attention and then apologizing for making anyone uncomfortable with the simple truth. I told her, in a voice that surprised both of us, because it was steady and warm, that I had not named anyone, that I had not insulted anyone, that I had not called out any scandal, that I had shared a single photo from a day we claim is about gratitude and had written a line about being invisible in a room full of people who call me theirs, and I said that if that felt humiliating it was probably because the words were accurate. And the silence between us was the kind that carries realization, even when no one wants it. And she tried again with a softer tone about how my uncle is old and sensitive and how my cousins are just excited to be acknowledged and how I am too strong to need that kind of fuss. And I answered that being strong does not mean pretending not to bleed when someone keeps cutting the same place. She asked me to take it down, to sleep on it, to call it a misunderstanding and put up a cheerful follow-up that smoothed it over, and I told her that I would not delete the truth to protect a tradition that erases me. And before she could launch into another plea, I added that I had adjusted the audience settings so that extended family could see the post, because the lesson here was not about punishing anyone. It was about ending a pattern that had been so convenient for everyone who benefited from my silence, and I heard her inhale like she had touched a hot pan because she understood what that meant for the family story tomorrow, and she whispered that I had no idea what I had just started. I ended the call politely, reopened the app, and without any extra commentary I toggled the post to public and pinned one last line that said, "I will not argue in private about what everyone witnessed in public." Then I put my phone face down and let the room go quiet, knowing that the small, precise cut I made would not heal with the usual bandages, and as the first cousin called and the group chat began to buzz like a hornet's nest, I poured my tea and smiled at the steam. Because for once the Story could not be rewritten without me, and tomorrow they would have to choose between pretending not to see it and admitting out loud that they always did. By the time I finished my tea and convinced myself to stop checking the notifications like a gambler feeding coins into a machine that only pays in adrenaline and regret, the group chat had already swollen into a chorus of careful accusations and clumsy apologies, with cousins typing long messages about how the speech was never meant to be a scoreboard and how I should know by now that my uncle gets nervous and forgets things, while the quieter relatives reacted with the kind of silence that is not neutral at all because it sits there like a verdict, and my parents pinged me privately to say they were disappointed that I would air something so personal on a day that is supposed to be about gratitude. Which is funny if you think about it, because I had spent years swallowing this exact kind of slight to keep the peace and had been told that was maturity. Yet the minute I chose a quiet sentence that did not name names or point fingers, I somehow became the tornado that ruined the meal. I answered my parents first, because it felt necessary to break the pattern at the root rather than keep arguing with the branches, and I wrote that I had not started a war. I had simply stepped out of a performance where everyone knows the blocking except me. And I added that if we were going to use the word gratitude, then we should include basic acknowledgement as part of the definition, and when my mother called to tell me that I had humiliated the family, I asked her how often I should agree to be treated like a background extra so that everyone else could feel good about their lines, and the quiet that followed did not come from a dropped signal. It came from that small place where the truth lands and takes a seat. The cousins shifted tone as the evening stretched on, moving from scolding to negotiation like people who have realized a narrative is slipping from their hands, and they floated ideas about a follow-up speech at dessert, about a joint photo with a caption that praised everyone equally, about a promise to be more mindful next year, and I said that dessert had already been eaten and next year was a convenient way to leave the current wound untreated. And I added that I was not looking for a staged act of kindness that could be posted with a cute note and a round of thumbs up. I wanted the grown-up thing, which is an honest sentence that admits the mistake without flinching. And the room went restless again, because that is the sentence nobody likes to say in families that survive on technically and intentions. While they debated the best way to minimize the discomfort, I did something I should have done many holidays ago. I opened a folder on my laptop and began to drag in the pieces that had accumulated in my memory like lint in a pocket. The little neglected moments that seem harmless alone but point in the same direction when lined up. The graduation party where the toast skipped me because the playlist needed to move. The family newsletter that listed the year's achievements and somehow placed my line under a header that said general updates. The birthday dinner where I was seated at the overflow table with kids because someone needed to make room for an aunt's neighbor, and I wrote short captions that were not vicious or theatrical, just precise. Because precision is what shakes people who rely on fog. When the folder had enough to stand on its own without leaning on anger, I turned it into a private album and shared it only with the family chat, and my message was as clean as I could make it. A single paragraph that said I do not want anyone dragged online. I do not want a public spectacle. I want us to look at a pattern we all participated in, whether by action or by shrug, and if we can agree to name it and stop it, then this album stays private and this conversation ends tonight. And I meant it. I meant every word, because I do not want scorched earth. I want a place where I do not have to beg to be seen. The replies arrived in two streams that never touched each other. One stream from the cousins who insisted this was all a misunderstanding that could be solved with a group hug and a promise to do better. And another stream from the relatives who suddenly remembered 100 small situations where they had noticed the same erasure and had said nothing. And it was the second stream that mattered, because truth loves companionship. And when my uncle finally entered the chat to write that he never intended to hurt me, and that he simply got carried away, I answered with a sentence that made the room tilt. I wrote that intent is not a bandage that fits every wound, and that forgetting a person is not the same as forgetting a line. He told me I was making too much of a moment, and that I should delete the post before it damaged reputations that did not deserve it. And I told him I had scheduled the album to go public the next afternoon with faces blurred and names removed except for my own, unless the family, not just him, wrote one sentence acknowledging that the Thanksgiving speech left one person out and that it was wrong. And I said the sentence did not need to be dramatic or groveling, it only needed to be honest. And then I set the timer and closed the laptop and put the phone in a drawer, because nothing stings a storyteller like the risk of losing control of the story. And somewhere in that house where the pie was almost gone and the dishes were stacked like a dare, the people who had laughed through the speech realized the quiet girl had finally found the loudest tool there is, time. The night stretched in that slow way holidays do when the plates are stacked and the jokes have curdled and the goodwill has turned into a negotiation. And while the group chat kept spinning in circles about tone and intent and how a single caption could not possibly capture the fullness of family love, my phone buzzed with a direct message from Olivia, the cousin who usually hides behind neutral emojis and potluck salads, and she wrote a long paragraph that started with an apology I did not ask for and moved into a confession I did not expect, explaining that she had helped my uncle write the speech because he was worried about forgetting details, that they had made a little index card with everyone's names and prompts like a cheat sheet, and that the card had been edited right before dinner when an aunt suggested he keep it tight so the toasting would not drag, and then she attached a photo of the crumpled card taken on the kitchen counter where someone must have tossed it. Beside the foil and the pie server, and there it was, a list of names with quick notes, a tidy line through mine written in the same pen as the word shortened in the margin, an erasure so casual it looked like grocery shopping. And as I stared at that image, I felt the odd relief that comes when a suspicion finally sits down and shows its face. I asked Olivia if I could crop the image to remove all other names and leave only the proof of the strike, because I did not want collateral damage or a pile-on, I wanted precision. And she said yes in another long paragraph full of the kind of guilt that people feel when they realize they have been bystanders for years, and I told her she did not need to write another sentence. That permission was enough, and that I saw her courage even if no one else did, and when I hung up I opened the private album I had built for the family and added the photo with a short caption that did not scream or accuse, but simply said that when time runs short, someone always becomes optional, and for too long that someone has been me. I pulled in more receipts not because I needed to bury them in exhibits, but because patterns reveal themselves best when they are allowed to stand upright without makeup. So I added a screenshot from the family newsletter where everyone's accomplishments were bolded under cheerful headings while mine sat in a side note about general updates. And I placed next to it the text from the birthday dinner where my aunt wrote that the main table was full and that I would understand because I was so good with kids, and then I included a clip pulled from my cousin's story where the Thanksgiving speech could be heard clearly in the background along with the entire sequence of names, which I had transcribed with one conspicuous blank in the middle where my name should have been. And as I looked at the neat emptiness on the page, I felt a steadiness I had not felt toward this family since I was a teenager trying to decide whether staying quiet would earn me a seat next year. The chat reacted exactly the way I knew it would, dividing into the camp that wanted to litigate intent like it was a legal defense against impact, and the camp that finally exhaled and said they had seen it too and had let it go because comfort is addictive. And my uncle sent me a private message that used many words to say very little, insisting again that he never meant harm and that the card had been edited without him noticing, and I answered with a single long sentence about accountability being the difference between an accident and a habit, and I reminded him of the deadline I had set because deadlines are how adults convert apology into action, and I wrote out the exact sentence the family could post if words were so difficult to find. A sentence that read that last night we thanked many and forgot one, and that forgetting was wrong, and that going forward we do not equate silence with strength, and I said that if the sentence appeared tagged to me before noon tomorrow, the album would remain private, and if it did not, the album would go public with faces blurred and names withheld except my own since I was the one telling the story. My mother called again and left a message that braided love and fear in the complicated way mothers do when tradition feels threatened, asking me to think about consequences and reputations and how stories never stay inside the box you put them in. And I saved it without replying because for once I was not going to be moved by the threat of social weather. And then my aunt, the same aunt who said the toast should be kept tight, texted that we should meet tomorrow for coffee so she could explain. which I translated to mean propose a way for me to swallow this without leaving a taste, and I agreed to meet because I am done refusing invitations that might finally deliver the truth out loud. But before I put the phone down, I did something that felt like the cleanest form of self-defense. I posted one new image publicly with the names blurred and the strike left visible. I wrote a calm caption that said, "This is what running out of time looks like when you use people as minutes," and I pinned a final line that told them I had written the missing sentence for them, and that the clock was already moving, and as the notifications began to pop like small fireworks, I closed the app and rested my hands in my lap. Because the point had finally landed in a place where it could not be massaged away, and tomorrow, if they wanted the album to stay private, they would have to say the words they had always avoided saying in any room where I was listening. The morning after felt like the kind of quiet that pretends to be harmless while it presses a thumb to your bruise to check whether you are still paying attention, and as I walked to the small cafe my aunt chose, because she wanted something neutral and neighborly, I told myself I would listen without interrupting, I would not chase validation like a dog chasing a car, and I would keep my offer as clean as glass, because last night I had already learned that in this family the only language anyone respects is the one that moves consequences from theory to calendar time. So when she sat down and started with the gentle script about misunderstandings and nerves and the good intentions that always seemed to sit at the head of our table, I let her finish, and then I laid out, in one long breath that did not tremble, that the album would stay private if the family posted the sentence I had already written, that the sentence would be pinned on the family page and tagged to me, and that, going forward, the thank you ritual would include every name in alphabetical order with no edits for time, because being cut to keep things tight is not a compliment, it is a hierarchy dressed up as efficiency. She tried the soft bargaining that has worked on me since I was a teenager, suggesting a cheerful photo of me with a slice of pie and a caption about how we sometimes forget the quiet ones but love them to pieces. And when I did not bite, she shifted to the warning that reputations can be fragile, and that the album I threatened to make public might be seen by people who would not understand context. And I told her that the only reputation at risk was the one built on pretending erasure is a misunderstanding, after which I added the part one had kept to myself, because I wanted this to end with something bigger than my name. Explaining that if the sentence was posted before noon, I would donate a matching gift in our family's name to the local food bank equal to what we had spent on desserts. Because if Thanksgiving is supposed to be about gratitude, then it can survive one honest sentence and one useful action, and if it cannot, then it is only a costume. She blinked at that because it turned the apology from a punishment into a pivot, and for a moment I could see her considering it the way people consider a steep ramp. Not because it is impossible, but because it makes the muscles work. Yet, as the hour crept closer to noon, she retreated into the familiar cave where optics matter more than outcomes, asking for more time, asking for a different sentence, asking for anything that would let the group save face without saying the thing that would shatter the habit. And I stood up, thanked her for the coffee, and told her that when a clock runs out, the lesson writes itself. Then I walked home with my phone in my pocket and my resolve in my hands like something new I did not plan to drop. At noon, with the family page stubbornly unchanged and my messages filling with combinations of pleading and scolding that would have sent the old me into a spiral of self-doubt, I published the album with the faces blurred and the names withheld, and the strike through my name left sharp enough to slice through any story about innocent mistakes, and beneath it I wrote a caption that did not spit or scream. A single paragraph that said, when tradition edits a person out to keep the timing neat, that tradition is not a harmless quirk but a map of who counts, and that I am done donating my place to the schedule, after which I added the same offer one last time, that the album would come down the minute the sentence went up, and that my donation would be processed the minute they chose honesty over choreography. The calls came like weather, fast and noisy, with cousins angry that I had escalated, with older relatives frightened that neighbors might connect dots that were already public, and with a few quiet messages from people who had never defended me before but now wrote that the card with the line through my name had kept them up at night, and while the house on the family side scrambled, my uncle finally broke the silence on the public page and posted a short, careful statement about love and imperfections that began to dissolve into fluff in the second line, so I replied with the exact sentence I had offered, not a word more, and I wrote that this was the sentence that closed the door and that anything else would only prove the point I was making. Then I put the phone down and let the next few minutes decide what the family would be in the years ahead. The notification landed with a vibration I felt in my wrist before I saw the screen, and when I opened the page, the sentence sat there in plain words without decorations or excuses. It said that last night we thanked many and forgot one. That forgetting was wrong, and that going forward we will not treat silence as strength or erasure as efficiency, and below it was my name, spelled correctly and not followed by a joke, and tagged to that sentence was a note that the family had made a donation to the food bank and that I was matching it today, which I did within the hour because following through is how you make a new pattern when the old one refuses to die. I took the album down and left one final post of my own that said I was not interested in theater, that I would not rehearse being grateful for scraps, and that from this holiday forward I would attend only the tables where every name fits without negotiation. And while a few relatives muttered about public shaming and others flooded my messages with relief that someone had finally pulled the cord, I sat in my kitchen with the receipt from the food bank and the screenshot of the sentence and the quiet understanding that I had not burned a family. I had only turned on the light and refused to stand in the corner, and even though I do not expect the years of habit to vanish in one season, I know that the next time a glass is raised the choice will not be whether to remember me but whether to ignore me on purpose, and that kind of clarity is its own justice, because I did not ask them to like me, I forced them to see me. And in the end that was the plan, and it worked.